Xavier Knox didn't expect a dirt road to fight back, but after swerving to avoid a deer and landing wrist first on the gravel, he found himself walking into a rural clinic with nothing but his pride and a dull, throbbing pain. Of all the places, he muttered, pushing open the creaky glass door with his good hand. The town of Willow Glen wasn't even on his GPS. His sleek black Maserati sat out front, looking like a spaceship parked outside a barn. "Can I help you?" a voice called from behind the counter. Xavier blinked. The nurse standing there wasn't what he expected. She wasn't in a stiff white uniform or looking bored out of her mind like the ones he usually saw at his private physician's office in Manhattan. She wore soft blue scrubs, her hair pulled into a loose braid that made her look effortlessly beautiful. Her name tag read Vera Ashford, RN. "Yeah," he said, holding up his wrist. "I think I sprained it. Took a bit of a fall." Vera walked around the counter, eyes flicking to his wrist, then to his tailored jacket and Italian shoes caked with dust. "Let me guess. You zigged when the deer zagged?" He let out a surprised laugh. "Exactly. Come on, city boy," she said, nodding toward the exam room. "Let's take a look." Xavier followed her, amused. He hadn't been called a boy in years. Not since he bought his first software company at 23 and became a millionaire before 30. Most people treated him like royalty. But this woman? She hadn't even blinked at the car or the watch on his wrist worth more than her entire clinic. Inside the exam room, Vera gently took his wrist and started checking for swelling. "You're lucky," she said, wrapping it in a soft bandage. "It's not broken. Just a mild sprain. Ice it. Rest it. Try not to crash into any more wildlife." "Thanks, Nurse Ashford," he said, watching her every move. She glanced up. "Vera. Vera," he repeated, liking the way it felt in his mouth. She moved to the sink, washing her hands. "You passing through?" "Sort of. On my way to a property a few towns over. Thought I'd take the scenic route. Didn't expect to land in a ditch." Vera dried her hands, then leaned on the counter across from him. "You're not from around here. That obvious? You're wearing cufflinks and your car probably costs more than this clinic." He grinned. "Fair point." Vera's eyes narrowed playfully. "You don't look like you're used to being told what to do." "I'm not." "Well, today you are. Ice it. And no lifting anything heavy." Xavier stood, still watching her. "Do you always talk to patients like that?" "Only the ones who try to impress me with their watches." He chuckled. "You're not impressed?" "Not even a little." He was impressed by her, though. More than that. He couldn't explain it, but something about her pulled him in. Maybe it was how she didn't care who he was. Or that she spoke to him like a man, not a millionaire. He reached into his jacket pocket. "Let me pay you, we don't charge for sprains," she said, cutting him off. "Especially not from deer-related drama." He stared at her. "You're serious?" Vera shrugged. "You need a receipt that says free?" He laughed again, shaking his head in disbelief. "Do you at least accept tips?" "Nope. But we do accept help around here. We're short-staffed. You want to ice that wrist and come back tomorrow morning? I could use someone to carry supply boxes. Didn't you just tell me not to lift anything heavy?" She smirked, no, smiled. "I said you shouldn't." "But you can supervise. You look like someone who's good at giving orders." Xavier raised an eyebrow. "You're inviting me back?" "Sure. Unless you're afraid of a little small-town sweat." "I'll be here," he said without thinking. He didn't even know why. He had a meeting the next morning. A call with his board. 1,000 things waiting for him. But none of them mattered right now. He left the clinic with an ice pack, a wrapped wrist, and a strange feeling in his chest. The next morning he returned. Vera was outside unloading boxes from the back of an old pickup truck. Her braid was messier today, her cheeks flushed from the sun. She looked up when he pulled in. "Didn't think you'd actually come back." "I'm a man of my word." Must be a first in this town, she muttered, tossing him a bottle of water. They worked well. She worked while he sat on a folding chair and supervised, as promised. She teased him mercilessly, and he gave it right back. He hadn't laughed this much in years. Around noon, she handed him a sandwich. Lunch. Don't say I never gave you anything. He took a bite. You make this? Nope. Gas station down the road. But I unwrapped it with love. He leaned back in the chair, watching her. She caught him staring. What? You're something else, Vera. She looked away, suddenly shy. You don't know me. I'd like to. She hesitated. You're not staying, are you? I don't know. That was the truth. He had a penthouse in Manhattan, a condo in L.A., and yet this tiny clinic with its peeling paint and one fire extinguisher felt like the only place he wanted to be. The next few days blurred. He kept coming back. His wrist healed, but he still showed up. To supervise. To bring her coffee. To sit in the cheap plastic chair and listen to her talk about the town, the patients, her life. She told him about her dad, who used to run the clinic before he passed. About how she stayed to keep it open for the community. How she didn't have time for dating, didn't trust men who showed up with expensive shoes and smooth lines. I'm not trying to impress you, he said one afternoon. I just like being here. She met his eyes. Why? He didn't know how to explain it. Maybe because with her, he didn't feel like Xavier Knox, tech mogul. He felt like a man. A man who could fall for a woman who made her own rules. One evening, he invited her to dinner. I'll cook, he said. Sort of. She raised an eyebrow. You cook? No, he admitted. But I can buy things. Very expensive things. He picked her up in a sleek black SUV instead of the Maserati. Drove her to a rented farmhouse just outside town. Inside, a private chef greeted her with a warm smile, the table already set with candles and silverware. Xavier, she whispered, looking around. I wanted to do something different. She turned to him, her voice soft. It's beautiful. You're beautiful. They ate by candlelight, laughter mixing with the clink of glasses. Her hand brushed his, and neither of them pulled away. I wasn't expecting this, she said after dessert. Neither was I, he said honestly. She looked at him, more serious now. I don't want to be a fling, Xavier. You're not. You have a whole life, money, companies, boardrooms. I have this clinic. I don't care about any of that, he said. I care about you. She didn't answer. But she leaned in and kissed him. And in that moment, everything changed. Vera hadn't planned on seeing him again after that kiss. She'd spent the night pacing her bedroom, still tasting wine and wondering what she'd just let herself start. Small towns didn't have room for fairy tales, and men like Xavier Knox didn't linger. They dropped in, swept through like storms, and left everything rearranged. But he showed up again the next morning, this time at the back entrance of the clinic, carrying a box of medical gloves with his uninjured hand, and a bag of warm pastries under his arm. You bribing your way past the front desk now? She asked, raising an eyebrow as she met him at the door. They said I'd have to wait, he replied, setting the supplies down. I figured food shortcuts the process. She eyed the bag. Is that from Langley's Bakery? I drove there before dawn. The woman behind the counter called me sweetheart and gave me 2 extra almond croissants. I think I'm finally blending in. She took the bag from him, trying not to smile. You're outrageous. You kissed me last night, he said, eyes locked on hers. I haven't stopped thinking about it. Xavier, I'm not asking for a future right now, he interrupted gently. Just breakfast. In the break room. 5 minutes. She didn't answer right away. But she didn't say no either. Inside, Vera poured 2 cups of coffee while Xavier cleared a stack of outdated medical journals from the tiny table beside the fridge. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, and the air smelled faintly of antiseptic and cinnamon. "You said you were headed to a property when you crashed here," she said, settling into the chair across from him. "What kind of property?" "An old estate outside of Bramble Ridge. I was supposed to meet a developer there. It's got potential, but I didn't like the feel of it." "You're buying it?" "Was considering it. Might still. Depends." "On what?" He leaned forward, elbows on the table. "On whether I have a reason to stay close." She stared at him, fingers tightening around her mug. "You don't even know me." "I know enough to want more." Vera shook her head. "You're used to getting what you want." "That's not how things work here. I'm not here to take anything away from you, Vera," he said quietly. "I just want to be where you are." She stood abruptly, tossing her napkin in the trash. "I have patience." He stood too. "I'll wait." By the time she returned to the front desk, he was gone. But on the counter sat a small bouquet of wildflowers, daisies, Queen Anne's lace, and one bold sunflower in the center. No note. Just color and sunlight in a cracked glass jar. Later that night, Vera sat on her porch with her knees pulled to her chest, watching the wind chase shadows across the fields. She hadn't told anyone about Xavier. Not Claire, who worked the desk part-time. Not old Mr. Jenkins, who came in twice a week just to chat about his blood pressure. It felt too fragile, too strange to say out loud. The next few days followed a rhythm she hadn't expected. Xavier showed up early, always with something practical: fresh gauze, restocked thermometers, a new set of chairs he claimed he found on sale. He never made a show of it. Just left things where they were needed and asked nothing in return. He didn't try to press her. If she was busy, he waited. If she was tired, he offered silence instead of questions. And somehow, without her realizing, his presence became routine. One afternoon, as she was reorganizing the supply shelf, he appeared beside her with a clipboard. "You're changing the inventory system," he said, reading the column she'd scribbled. "You noticed. You're still using paper. You know I could design something better in, don't say 5 minutes," she warned, not looking up. He chuckled. "Fine. 10. She faced him then. "Why are you still here?" "Because I'm not finished." "Doing what?" "Figuring out if I'm allowed to fall in love with you." Her breath caught. "You don't even know what that means, not here. Falling in love here isn't candlelight and wine. It's running out of heating oil in January and fixing a roof leak with duct tape." "Then show me," he said simply. She looked away, overwhelmed by how easily he said it. That evening, as she locked up the clinic, she heard a familiar engine idle beside the curb. His SUV door opened, but he didn't get out. Instead, he waited until she approached. "I want to take you somewhere," he said. She hesitated. "Where?" "You'll see." He drove them past the edge of town, down a narrow road that wound through trees and opened up into a clearing. There, under a canopy of stars, was a single long table set with lanterns, simple plates, and 2 metal chairs. No tuxedoed servers. No fine crystal. Just a picnic basket and a chilled bottle of cider. "I asked Claire if she knew a good spot," he said. "She told me this was where your dad used to bring you after long shifts." Vera's throat tightened. "You remembered." "I remember everything you tell me." They sat there, eating cold chicken and laughing at the sound of owls nearby. He took her hand across the table, and for the first time, she didn't pull away. "I didn't expect any of this," she whispered. "Neither did I," he said. "But I'm not running. Not this time." She leaned her head on his shoulder, and he kissed the top of her head. Beneath the stars, with the forest rustling around them and the scent of pine in the air, Vera realized something terrifying and true. She was starting to believe him. Vera didn't tell anyone she'd started seeing Xavier outside the clinic. Not even Claire, who had a radar for romantic developments sharper than any blood test. It wasn't that Vera was ashamed, hardly. It was that she couldn't explain it. Not how easily he'd embedded himself into her life, or how the quiet between them never felt empty. But secrets, even sweet ones, didn't stay hidden long in a town like Willow Glen. On a humid Thursday morning, Vera stepped out of exam room 2 and nearly collided with Dottie Halpern, who was known for treating gossip like a civic duty. "I heard your helper is back again today," Dottie said, adjusting her oversized sun hat indoors as if preparing for battle. "The one with the fancy tires and the jawline? His name is Xavier," Vera replied, keeping her voice even as she walked toward the storage room. "He's been helping out." "Helping or hanging around?" Dottie followed, undeterred. "Not that I blame you. If someone like that looked at me twice, I'd be ordering monogram towels." Vera nearly dropped the clipboard she was holding. "Dottie, I'm just saying," she said, lowering her voice conspiratorially. "A man doesn't keep showing up with new thermometers unless he's after something warmer." Vera avoided the bait and returned to logging the news shipment of gauze pads, but her hands moved slower than usual. By noon, she found Xavier in the back hallway, standing beside the water cooler, flipping through a dog-eared anatomy book someone had left out. "You're practically staff now," she said, walking past him toward the break room. "I figured if I'm going to spend all this time here, I should at least understand where the spleen is." "You're not getting a name tag? Not even a laminated one?" She laughed, but didn't stop. He followed her into the room and leaned against the counter. "I think people are starting to notice," she said after a moment. "Notice what?" "That you're here. A lot. I'm not hiding." "I know, but this town isn't exactly the kind that lets things stay uncomplicated." "Since when has anything between us been uncomplicated?" She looked at him, serious now. "You're not like them, Xavier. I'm not trying to be. That's the problem." He crossed his arms. "So what do you want me to do? Pretend I don't care about you? Pretend I'm not willing to figure this out, even if it doesn't make sense on paper? I want you to understand that this, whatever this is, it doesn't work if you're just visiting." "I'm not visiting. You said you were passing through. I said that 3 weeks ago. And now?" He stepped toward her, closing the space between them. "Now I'm buying that estate in Bramble Ridge. Renovating it. Turning it into a retreat center. I've already signed the preliminary agreement." She blinked. "What?" "I didn't tell you because I didn't want to pressure you. But I made the decision last week. I'll be 30 minutes from here. Permanently." She stared at him, stunned. "You'd give up your life in the city? For this?" "I'm not giving anything up. I'm building something new. I've built companies, portfolios, entire systems. But I've never built a life with someone. And you think that someone is me? I know it is." She exhaled, heart pounding. "You're insane." "Probably. But I'd rather be insane with you than sane without you." The clinic phone rang down the hall, breaking the moment. Vera turned, torn between the call and the man standing in front of her with a blueprint for a future she hadn't dared to imagine. "Go," he said softly. "I'll be here." That night she sat on the edge of her porch with her feet bare and a glass of water sweating in her palm. The sky was already bruising purple, and the crickets were loud enough to drown out most thoughts. But not all. Her phone buzzed. "Unknown number." She answered cautiously. "Hello? Miss Ashford?" a male voice asked. "This is Charles Denning. I'm with Knox and Wade Associates." Something tightened in her spine. "Yes? I was instructed to deliver a package to you. Mr. Knox asked that it be placed directly in your hands." She stood, heart in her throat. "Where?" "I'm outside." She walked to the front door and opened it to find a man in a tailored charcoal suit holding a slim leather folder. He handed it to her with a polite nod and retreated without another word. Inside was a single page. It was a deed. To the old Miller house on the corner of Maple and 3rd, the one Vera had dreamed of buying for years but had never been able to afford, not while keeping the clinic afloat. At the bottom was a note, handwritten in Xavier's unmistakable scrawl. For the woman who heals everyone else. Let someone take care of you for once. She didn't sleep that night. Her heart wouldn't let her. By morning, she was at his rental, knocking on the door before the sun had fully risen. He opened it in black sweatpants and a wrinkled t-shirt, eyes bleary. Vera? She held up the deed. You had no right. I had every right, he said, stepping aside. Come in. She stayed rooted. You can't just buy me houses. I didn't buy it for you. I bought it for us. For later. For whenever you're ready. I didn't ask for this. No. But I think part of you wanted it. You've been giving so much to everyone else for so long, you don't know how to accept anything anymore. Her voice faltered. It's too much. Then I'll give you less. Or more. Or nothing. Just tell me what you want. She stepped inside. I want to trust this, she whispered. Then start now. So she did. She took his hand, and for the first time, didn't pull away. Vera stood at the center of the old Miller house, the keys still cold in her hand. Morning light filtered through dusty windows, casting golden streaks across the hardwood floor. It smelled faintly of cedar and possibility. You're quiet, Xavier said, leaning against the doorframe. Should I be worried? I'm trying to picture furniture, she said, turning in place. And not panic. He stepped inside, taking in the bare walls and cracked molding. We can change every inch of it if you want. Or leave it exactly like this. I don't need it to be perfect, she said. I just need it to feel like mine. Then we'll make it yours, he said. Room by room. She glanced at him. You say that like you plan on being here for all of it. I do. They spent the morning walking the property. Vera pointed out where she imagined a small herb garden, and Xavier made a mental note to have someone test the soil. When she mentioned a wraparound porch, he asked her to draw it. She laughed, saying she couldn't draw to save her life. He said he didn't care. Later, they returned to the clinic for her afternoon shift. The town hadn't said anything directly, but eyes lingered a little longer. Claire raised both eyebrows when Vera passed her in the hallway and mouthed something that looked suspiciously like, "About time." After she finished charting her last patient, Xavier was waiting beside her car. I have something to show you, he said. She didn't ask questions. Just followed. He drove them past the main road, down a gravel path flanked by overgrown hedges, until they reached the estate he'd purchased near Bramble Ridge. The gates were open, the wrought iron still bearing the faded initials of the previous owner. Vera stared at the wide driveway, the ivy-covered stone facade, the sloping hill behind it that overlooked the valley. You said retreat center? She murmured. I meant it, he replied. For doctors, nurses, first responders. Anyone who spends their life helping others and never gets a moment to breathe. I want to give them a place to rest. She turned to him, stunned. You never told me that. I wasn't sure I could pull it off. But now I know I can. Her voice caught. And you're doing this because of you, Vera. Because you never ask for anything. And I want to give you everything. She looked at the house again. It's a lot. It's just the beginning. They walked through the estate together. He showed her the plans, a main lodge, private cabins, a greenhouse, a wellness wing. She asked about the logistics, insurance, zoning, staffing, and he answered every question with the kind of precision that only came from living inside a spreadsheet for most of his adult life. When they reached the back terrace, she leaned against the railing, watching the hills turn lavender under the setting sun. You know, she said, when you walked into my clinic that first day, I thought you were going to be arrogant and impossible. I was. You still are, she admitted. But you listen. And you stayed. He stood beside her, quiet for a moment. I've spent years building things that didn't matter. But this us, it matters. She turned to face him. You're not just here for now, are you? I'm here for every version of the future you'll let me be part of. She didn't answer with words. Just leaned forward, resting her forehead against his, and in that quiet moment, everything settled. The next week moved fast. Xavier hired a local contractor to start the initial repairs on the Miller house. Vera helped choose paint colors for the kitchen soft sage, not because it was trendy, but because it reminded her of her mother's garden. The retreat center plans were submitted to the county board. Xavier attended the hearing in person, dressed in a navy button-down that made the mayor do a double take. He spoke clearly, with conviction, and when he mentioned Vera's name, she saw half the room shift in recognition. They weren't hiding anymore. One afternoon, while Xavier was reviewing blueprints in the clinic's back office, Vera walked in holding a manila envelope. She set it on the desk in front of him. He looked up. "What's this?" "P.O. Box renewal. I used to pick it up for the clinic every April, but I forgot with everything going on." He opened the envelope. Inside was a single letter addressed to Vera, postmarked from out of state. She frowned. "That's not mine." He passed it to her. She tore it open carefully, eyes scanning the page. "It's from my dad's old friend," she said slowly. "He was going through some storage and found something my father wrote years ago. A mission statement. For the clinic." Xavier waited. She read aloud. "We take care of our people. Not because they pay. Not because they're powerful. Because they're ours. And when the world forgets them, we don't." Her voice wavered. "He wrote that before I even finished nursing school," she said. "I never saw it before." Xavier reached across the desk and took her hand. "Frame it. Hang it over your desk." She nodded, blinking back tears. 2 weeks later, the clinic held a town fundraiser at the fairgrounds. Vera had organized it every year since her father passed, but this time, she wasn't doing it alone. Xavier brought in a stage, 2 food trucks, a local jazz quartet, and a silent auction with items no one could believe had ended up in Willow Glen, from a signed guitar to private cooking lessons with a Michelin-starred chef. When someone asked how he pulled it off, he just shrugged and said, "I made some calls." Vera watched from the edge of the dance floor as children ran laughing between booths and couples slow danced under strings of lights. Claire nudged her. "You really brought the billionaire to heel," she said. Vera shook her head. "He brought himself." Later that night, as the music wound down and the crowd thinned, Xavier took the mic with little warning. He stood under the lanterns, the night wind tugging at his shirt, and looked out at the people who had once eyed him with suspicion and were now offering him pie recipes and unsolicited advice about lawn care. "I came here by accident," he said. "But I stayed because of one woman." The crowd quieted. "She didn't change for me. She didn't soften. She just kept being exactly who she was. And that reminded me who I wanted to be." Vera stood frozen as he looked at her. "I don't need a stage to tell you this," he said. "But I want you to know. I love you. I'm not going anywhere. And if you'll have me, I want to spend the rest of my life proving it." No one clapped. Not yet. They all turned to Vera. She walked across the grass, heart racing, and stopped in front of him. "You didn't ask a question," she said, barely able to speak past the grin spreading across her lips. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a ring, simple, elegant, with a single stone, and held it out. "Will you marry me, Vera Ashford?" Tears slipped from her lashes. She nodded. "Yes," she whispered. The crowd exploded. And in that moment, under a canopy of lights and stars, with the town cheering and the future wide open, Xavier Knox, millionaire tech mogul, realized he'd finally built something that couldn't be bought. Something that would last. The first morning in their shared home began quietly. No grand speeches. No champagne flutes. Just Vera padding barefoot into the kitchen in one of Xavier's old shirts, her hair still wet from the shower, and the scent of fresh coffee already drifting through the house. "You beat me to it," she said, surprised, tugging her robe tighter. Xavier glanced up from the stove, a spatula in one hand and a half-burnt pancake in the other. Barely. If you'd taken another 5 minutes, I might have set off the smoke alarm. You're trying to impress me with breakfast? I'm trying not to poison you. She crossed the room and stole the spatula, flipping the pancake with ease. Step aside, Knox. This is clearly a two-person operation. They settled into a rhythm that neither of them had expected to enjoy so much. She fixed the batter. He poured the juice. They argued lightly over whether syrup belonged on eggs. It was domestic, messy, and nothing like the fast-paced life Xavier had spent years chasing. And he loved it. Later that afternoon, Vera stood in the middle of the clinic's storage room, clipboard in hand, scanning the shelves for a shipment that hadn't arrived. The fluorescent light above flickered again and she frowned. From the hallway, she heard footsteps and Xavier's voice, lower than usual. You said you had a surprise? She called without turning. I do. But it's not for here. She turned around, suspicious. Where then? You'll see. Bring your coat. He didn't give her time to argue. 20 minutes later, they were driving out past the main road, the landscape shifting from town to open fields and then to the winding path that led to the estate. But he didn't stop at the main house. Instead, he pulled up to a smaller cottage tucked behind the orchard, partially hidden by a line of cypress trees. The roof had been recently replaced, and the porch had a fresh coat of white paint. Vera stepped out slowly, staring. You renovated this? She asked. I restored it, he corrected. Mostly. It used to be the caretaker's quarters. I thought it'd make a good guest house. Or an office. Or maybe a space for you. For me? If you ever wanted to expand the clinic's services. Maybe bring in counseling. Or host health retreats. I know you've been talking about broader community care. She turned to him, stunned. I mentioned that once. You talk. I listen. She stepped onto the porch, fingers trailing along the railing. This is more than I imagined. You've spent years giving people what they needed. I wanted to give you what you didn't dare ask for. Inside, the space was warm and open, with sunlight spilling through the large windows. The walls were pale oat, the floors rich walnut. There was a row of built-in bookshelves against one wall and a stone fireplace that hadn't been lit yet. Vera knelt in front of the hearth, running her hand along the carved wood mantel. This feels like a beginning, she said softly. It is. The days that followed moved quickly. Renovations at the estate progressed. The retreat center's name, Ashford Haven, was approved by the town council. Xavier insisted Vera take full credit, which she refused with equal firmness. They compromised. Her name was etched into the cornerstone, his initials into the weather vane. They hosted their first open house 2 weeks later. People came from neighboring towns, curious about this new place that promised restoration. Vera gave tours while Xavier answered endless questions from donors and health officials. At one point, she caught him adjusting a folding chair for a woman with a cane, listening to her story as if it were the only one in the world. That night, back at home, Vera curled into the couch beside him, her head on his chest. You made this happen, she murmured. No, he said, brushing her hair back. You made me want to. She looked up at him, serious now. Do you miss it? Miss what? The boardrooms. The cities. The noise. He paused. I miss the challenge. But I've found a new one. What's that? Figuring out how to keep up with you. She laughed, then grew quiet again. I never thought I'd get all of this. A home. A partner. A future that feels real. You didn't get it, he said. You built it. The next morning, Vera found a small envelope on her dresser. Inside was a plain ticket to Tuscany and a note that simply read, Let's disappear for a week before the world demands our attention again. When she turned around, Xavier was leaning against the doorframe, already dressed, his suitcase by his side. You don't have to say yes, he said. She walked over, kissed him once, then twice. I'm already packed. Tuscany was everything they hadn't known they needed: sun-drenched hills, quiet vineyards, and time. Time to just be, without obligations or interruptions. They rode bikes through old villages, got lost on winding roads, and slept until noon more than once. On their final night, they stood on the balcony of their villa, wrapped in a blanket, the stars scattered across the sky like confetti. "We should get married here," Vera said suddenly. He looked at her, surprised. "Here? Not in a ballroom. Not with 500 guests and a champagne tower. Just us. A few friends. A view like this." He kissed her hand. "Say the word." And she did. 3 weeks later, under the arched cypress trees of a small Tuscan chapel, Vera Ashford and Xavier Knox said their vows. Claire cried through the whole ceremony. The mayor sent a letter of congratulations signed by half the town. Xavier's assistant sent a one-line message. Finally! They spent their honeymoon hiking the Dolomites and eating their weight in tiramisu. When they returned to Willow Glen, the clinic had new chairs, the Miller house had a front porch swing, and the retreat center had its first round of guests. Life didn't slow down. But they didn't want it to. On warm evenings, they sat on the porch, watching fireflies blink across the yard. Vera would rest her head on Xavier's shoulder, and he'd wrap an arm around her waist like it was the most natural thing in the world. Because it was. They didn't talk about forever. They lived it.